Good afternoon. Welcome to Daily Answer Writing Program. In this session, we will take questions asked on 11th of November in UPPCS DAWP program. And the two questions that day were asked, one on ethics and another one dealt with current affairs. So the first question was, and let me read it. Both internal and external environments influence our ethical framework. Both internal and external environments, they influence our ethical framework. Discuss this statement in the context of a civil servant. Both internal and external environments influence our ethical framework. So every individual, each one of us have our own ethical framework within which we decide good and bad, which determines our actions. Okay. So that ethical framework is determined by our internal and external environment. Internal environment means our thought process, our conscience and our rational thinking. So that is our internal environment, our state of mind. And the external environment is the environment which we deal with outside of us. Okay, the physical environment, people we meet, places we visit, okay, the institutions we come in contact with. So that is our external environment. Question asks you to discuss this statement in context of a civil servant. Okay, so this question is very peculiar and simple at the same time, and let us see how we can start it. So in introduction, and as I am reminding this thing, that you need not to mention subheading of introduction and conclusion while writing your answer. You have to straightforward start your answer. After introduction, you can make subheadings while going into the main body of the answer. So the first thing is, in introduction, we can define ethical framework of an individual. In introduction, you can define ethical framework of an individual. Ethical framework of an individual. This is one way to introduce it. The second way to introduce it is explaining the internal and external environment of an individual. You can also explain in briefly explain external and internal environment of an individual. So these are two ways in which you can introduce this answer. Now coming to the main body, the question is specifically asking that you have to discuss the statement in context of a civil servant. So how does the ethical framework of a civil servant is influenced by both internal and external environments? That thing you have to discuss, and the answer should be in 125 words. Now as we come to the main body, we make a subheading. Influence on ethical framework of a civil servant. Influence on ethical framework of a civil servant. You can directly make this subheading after the introduction, so that it gives a proper structure as well as good presentation to your answer. Now you can segregate it between two aspects, the internal environment and the external environment. Within this subheading, you can make further two small subheadings of internal environment and the external environment. What are the internal environment? The first thing is state of mind. Though state of mind is also influenced by the external environment, but the state of mind is something which underlies within us. So we will take it as an internal environment. First thing is state of mind. The second thing is our rational cognition. The second internal environment is our rational cognition. Okay, and emotions and other non-rational and irrational aspects of our cognition is covered under the state of mind. The third thing is individual conscience. Now along these components we can see that a state of mind, it leads us to take more balanced decisions and have a balanced outlook towards various ethical questions and various ethical dimensions. So this is how state of mind, it influences our ethical framework. Second thing is rational cognition. So it is also a part of our internal environment, and as we know that ethics is a study of good and bad. So ethics is a philosophy. We know that ethics is a branch of philosophy which deals with good and bad. Fine. So our rational cognition helps us to objectively determine why some action is good and why some action is bad. So in this manner it determines our ethical framework. Coming to individual conscience, we know that we all have a human conscience within us, and it is based upon intuition, and many philosophers and thinkers have explained human conscience in their own different manners. So human conscience, it is rooted within our core of our existence. It is rooted in the core of our existence, and it comprises our very rational moral being. Okay, it comprises our very moral rational being. Okay, so our conscience also drives our ethical actions, and most of the time we know that higher the level of conscience or the more conscientious a person is, the more ethical he or she will be. So it has also major influence of our ethical framework. Fine. So this was with respect to the internal environment. In context of a civil servant, if you talk, in a balanced state of mind, a civil servant can take more balanced and a holistic, comprehensive view of any emerging situation and take corresponding ethical decision. As far as rational cognition is concerned, it will help a civil servant to approach something in an objective manner, unbiased manner and logical manner. So that is very important when you bring in the context of the civil servant. The third thing is individual conscience. So the civil servant should not only think from his perspective, he should think giving priority to the collective interest, and thus how his individual conscience or her individual conscience will shape and frame his ethical framework. So this was in context of a civil servant. Coming to the external environment, so we have the physical and non-physical aspects. Physical and non-physical aspects. Non-physical aspects. Okay. So physical aspect, as I already discussed in the beginning, it is like interactions with people in society, with organizations, groups, companies, okay, and different sorts of interactions we have. Non-physical interactions means interactions with non-physical components of our existence. Non-physical components of our existence. So these two also impact our ethical framework. In context of a civil servant, physical, you can understand that if a civil servant is placed in a very stressing physical environment, then he or she can have some issues while taking an ethical decision or while evaluating an ethical consideration. So physical environment has to be healthy. That's why we say that a good work culture is very essential for increasing productivity and efficiency. So all these aspects you can bring in to your answer. In context of non-physical, so as I discussed, non-physical environment, which is other than these components of nature we deal with, okay, and we deal with our own being, we deal with being of others, and we deal with the problem of collective existence. So at the level of such non-physical existence, the ethical framework is determined. For example, a nation can have a different set of value system. Different nation can have a different set of value system. So in that scenario, the non-physical environment, which is not exactly or tangibly existing, but it exists as a form of concept. For example, a nation, when it exists as a form of concept, so that also shapes our ethical framework, okay, and that is rooted in our culture, that is rooted in our heritage and all those things. In case of a civil servant, non-physical aspects, you can see that we can have a national integration sentiment, we can have a nationalistic sentiment. A civil servant must conform to the highest standards of national values. So this is how the ethical framework of a civil servant is determined or influenced by external factors. On these lines, when you discuss, then you can conclude that a person, the ethical framework of a person becomes whole in context of both physical and non-physical and external and internal environment, okay. The ethical framework of a person is shaped, modified by both internal and external environment. So a healthy internal and external environment can produce more ethical individuals, and it applies to the case of a civil servant also. So this is how you will conclude this answer. Fine. Now coming to the second question, which deals with current affairs. Coming to the second question, it is on comment on the issue of restoration of old pension scheme OPS, okay. Comment on the issue of, here take care of the directive word comment. Comment means you have to provide your own opinion over the issue of restoration of the old pension scheme OPS for government employees, which was replaced by the new pension scheme in 2004. So essentially you have to comment on the demand of restoration of old pension scheme. Fine. So how we can introduce and how we can start? Let's see. You have to comment, put this thing in mind, because the directive words play a very critical role while writing answers. So the introduction should be, you need not write introduction as a subheading. I am mentioning it for the sake of your understanding, and nor you have to put bullets, okay. So these habits should not be done. For sake of explanation, I am putting bullets and the subheading of introduction. In introduction, you can again have multiple choices to start your answer. The first thing is, you can start with defining OPS or the old pension scheme, which is also known as direct pension benefit scheme in few states. So what was OPS or the DPBS? Second thing is, you can also start with NPS. You can also start with NPS. Or the third thing is, you can also introduce with the demand of, restoration of old pension scheme. So this is the third thing, okay. The most effective way will be to, because the question is focused on old pension scheme and its restoration, so more effective way will be to introduce with defining old pension scheme, which was replaced in 2004 by the new pension scheme. So it will be the best way to introduce this answer. Coming to the main body, we frame a subheading of issue of restoring the old pension scheme, and you have to comment on it, that is OPS, and you have to comment on it, okay. So the first thing is that this year Rajasthan and Chhattisgarh government, they decided and they announced that they are restoring the old pension scheme in their respective states, okay. So after that, the demand spread to other various areas and other various states also, like Punjab, Andhra Pradesh, okay, Himachal. So in those states also, government employees, they started asking for restoration of the old pension scheme, because it guaranteed, it assured pension income post retirement to the employees, to the government employees, okay. And in new pension scheme, as we know that the new pension scheme, it made the pension scheme participatory, okay, and based upon the participation of or the amount contributed by the state or central government employee, the pension will be determined. And all these schemes are very important because questions in including prelims exam have already been asked from these areas, okay. So you need to take care of these aspects. So the first issue is that it has now become a political issue. It has now become a political issue, and political parties also promise of restoration of the old pension scheme while election. So first, your first comment, you need to take into care that you have to comment on the issue. So the first things can be the demand has become a political issue, and you can add that the demand is particularly raised during elections, and the political parties, they also make promises related to it. The second aspect is that in old pension scheme there was an assured social security system. There was an assured social security system in terms of post-retirement pensions. But the problem is that the government had to bear the entire burden of the OPS. The government had to bear the entire burden. Now the government says that it has become financially untenable. Recently, the finance ministry also said that, and said to a federation of central and state government employees that the demand has become financially untenable. Now it cannot be introduced again. This is a major concern related to, you can write, the demand has been rejected, or the finance ministry has rejected the proposal. The demand has been rejected by the finance ministry, calling it financially untenable. So you can say that the recent demands has been raised, but the central government has already said that it cannot be met because it will bring more financial burden on the government. The third thing is that, which is a very important part when it comes to the issue of restoring the old pension scheme, that there is a lack of parity between the employees, the government employees who joined on or after 1 April 2004 and before that, because that was the deadline after which the new pension scheme would have applied on the new recruitees. So it also produces a kind of division between central or state government employees who are in the same service but they have different pension privileges. So you can also bring in that aspect of inequality. Or discrimination. Okay, you can also bring in the aspect of inequality or discrimination. Now coming to the fact that trade unions and various other employees organizations, they are also supporting the idea of restoring the old pension scheme in place of the new pension scheme. And as you know that the features of new pension scheme is that it is managed by fund managers, and the individual voluntary contributions by or participation by the employees, they turn out to make payments in terms of pension post their retirement. Now when you explain these points in terms of old pension scheme, because you had to comment on its restoration, you commented that from where the demands are coming from, what is the opinion of various state governments, what is the opinion of the central government, and what you think about it, whether the program or whether the scheme is tenable financially or not. So after writing all those aspects, you have to conclude your answer. And how you will conclude your answer? The conclusion should be that both pros and cons of restoration should be analyzed in detail given the current change in economic scenario, okay, and various stakeholder consultations should be made. Various stakeholder consultations should be made in order to achieve a consensus. So this is how you can conclude your answer. Thanks a lot for joining the session, and I hope that it has benefited you. So we keep discussing. Hi UPSC Kurukshetra, one user with the name UPSC Kurukshetra. Good evening, good afternoon for joining the session. And now, as we have already concluded discussing both the answers, so all of you please join us at 3:30 p.m. daily for live discussion of daily answer writing program, discussion of 2 questions we undertake. So thanks a lot for joining the session. Thank you.